and sentiments. The system just told me that recording is in process, so that's good. So political culture is a set of attitudes, beliefs, and sentiments which give order and meaning to a political process and which provide the underlying assumptions and rules that govern behavior within a political system. I think it's quite comprehensive and fairly clear and rather operational. I mean, you can give lots of examples of all of the ingredients of that definition, but I am aware of the fact that there are others, and perhaps some conceptual analysis and comparisons and so forth would be in order. And that type of exercise might also facilitate the identification of plausible formalisms that may help in the construction of a formal theory of political culture. So the key problem, if there is a problem here to be addressed, is that it seems to me, on the one hand, the concept of political culture is very important, not only in political science, but in a number of other social sciences as well. And it's important because it is the foundation of how most political systems, most polities are structured and how they operate, what gives a certain amount of stability, if you will, of persistence, of recurrency in the patterns of a polity. On the other hand, their concept has been around for a very, very, very long time. I mean, not quite 100 years, but we're getting there, I think, quite soon. And so this seems to be an area of social science that has been among those that has been pretty much has remained informal, and may continue to be so for an indefinite time. On the other hand, it might be worthwhile to look at it more closely and see whether there might be some interesting opportunities for developing a formal theory, or even more than one theory, contending formal theories of political culture, and have them, you know, as the normal scientific process goes, have them compete for efficiency and effectiveness and so forth. So in the process of thinking about these ideas, it seemed to me that it would be at least honest to try to give some examples of the kinds of formalisms that might be some initial candidates. And so in my abstract, I listed, initially I listed 5 of them, then I thought about a couple of others that I shared with Martin, and I'll tell you about those in just a moment. But the first one, which I think is quite exciting, and I haven't seen a great deal about this recently, is the work that Osgood did a number of years ago in identifying a 3-dimensional space in the affective meaning of social discourse. The space of evaluation, potency, and activity from the cross-cultural factor analysis that he conducted decades ago on a myriad, on a very, very extensive vocabulary. That is interesting because the result of that study provided a metric space, a 3-dimensional metric space, in which every value and concept of political culture of individual countries and different societies can be placed. Not only it can be placed by EPA coordinates, but it can even be monitored over time to assess the stability of such beliefs. Anyway, so that's one of them. Osgood's cognitive theory of affective meaning. I think that would be an interesting formalism to consider as a potential candidate. Secondly, every instance of a political culture involves important decisions. For example, the decision of a citizen as to whether to vote or not to vote, and if so, for whom to vote, or to decide on which issues are important and worth voting for. So there are a number of decisions, and some of these decisions are, of course, interdependent. So now we come into games. So obviously, formal decision theory and game theory are obvious formalisms that can help to structure and identify key ingredients of what constitutes a given political culture, and also for comparative purposes. For example, how individuals or citizens in different political cultures that may otherwise seem quite distant and quite different, how their key decisions and games might compare in political practice. A third of these has to do with, a third formalism has to do with all kinds of finite sequences that are encountered in some of the important parts of a political culture. For example, the process of participation in the public square, participating in public life. Well, what does that consist of in practice? I mean, in reality, is that something that is simply by ascribed right, or is it something that requires registration of some kind? Does it require certain affiliations, or is it a very spontaneous form of participation? All of these processes, which are the nuts and bolts, if you will, of political life, and constitute what is expected of proper political behavior and political culture, they're finite processes. And insofar as they're finite, they're susceptible to formalization by a number of mathematical structures that have a certain range. For example, they might be Markovian processes in one case. There could also be branching processes, and all of these different kinds of finite processes, finite sequences that constitute a class of formalisms. And by the way, while many of these formalisms are purely mathematical, some of them can also be computational. And even, for example, auxiliary formalisms of computational methods, such as the unified modeling language, the UML diagrams, which provide, for example, for class diagrams and sequence diagrams, they can be very useful in specifying in unambiguous, well-defined sense the elements of a political culture. For example, what is expected in terms of what is the ontology of participation in public life of citizens? Well, that's a finite ontology, which can be specified with classes and so forth by a UML class diagram. Or the process of political participation insofar as, for example, running for public office is concerned. That can be specified by a sequence diagram, or the process of voting, or the resolution of disputes in contentious elections, for example. All kinds of things which are part and parcel of a political culture can be specified through some of these formal aids. Fourthly, there's always a belief system that overarches the definition of political culture. Well, belief systems can be formalized in terms of graphs. They have been for decades now. And many of these graphs are weighted or directed and multiplexes and what have you not. But you have the entire panoply of graph theoretic methods at disposal to specify large-scale, highly complex belief systems, which may not be done by paper and pencil, but can certainly be done by computational means and the recording of many parts of such systems. Fifthly, it occurred to me that along the way, one encounters, whether within games or graphs or decisions or what have you not, functions, mappings of variables onto dependent variables. And some of these functions, as is often the case, may contain a mixture of continuous independent variables and discrete independent variables. Discrete independent variables, for example, may constitute cardinalities or numbers of elements in a set. For example, legitimate political decisions that are made on behalf of a community should be made perhaps not by a single individual, which is cardinality 1, but perhaps by a group of elders of that society, which are considered to be experienced and wise and what have you not. This is common in a number of empirical instances. Well, the number of individuals is obviously a discrete cardinality, a natural number, doesn't contain fractions like 2.7 and 4.2. So these functions that exist in various contexts of modeling may involve hybrid functions of containing both continuity and discreteness. And the calculus of hybrid functions is something that is now becoming more feasible and might be considered a useful instrument as well. And then finally, I'll mention the case of deontic logic. Deontic logic is a field of multimodal logic which was invented by Scandinavian mathematical logicians quite a number of decades ago, in Finland in particular, which is the logic, you can think about it as the logic of obligation. It's probably well known to a number of you. But it is a formal logic, and all kinds of statements and beliefs about civic obligations, for example, can be readily stated in terms of deontic logic, which is a well-developed, by now well-established and powerful formalism for drawing valid inferences that involve situations of behavioral obligation and compellence and what have you not. And then finally, just simply to go back to the origins of formal social science, I would say the theory of Haider on cognitive balance and the algebra of science in determining the coherence and balancing mechanisms of belief systems. That is an important part of political culture as well. And one of the interesting parts about that, it is not at all a static, it may give initially an impression of a static theory of cognition, but it really isn't. It's quite dynamic, especially in base of the, due to the balancing mechanisms which Haider and his successors proposed when inconsistencies and cases of incoherence arise in the belief system of a political culture. For example, a political culture that is very strongly grounded on meritocracy sometimes may have difficulties finding justification or legitimacy for claims to political authority based not on particular merit, but perhaps on delegation by some other agent or agents. How is that made coherent? How is that balanced? Well, Haider's theory contains a number of balancing mechanisms, principally 4 of them, but by now a few others have also been identified. So I will stop here in terms of the types of a variety of formalisms that may be available today, without mentioning others that have never been tried but could plausibly be useful. And so I will conclude very briefly with the following thoughts. Why would anybody want to develop a formal theory of political culture. Why would that be desirable? And I think that it would be helpful in a number of ways, and I've listed these in the abstract. I've listed half a dozen of them. I'll just touch upon three of them. First of all, it would provide a way to clarify by minimizing ambiguity on the concept itself, what it consists of, and how it can be used for comparative purposes. I think that would be a useful function. It would also be useful for those social scientists interested in developing agent-based models and computational simulations of politics and society, because a formal casting of the political culture of a community of agents would go a long ways in facilitating the creation of properly and well-grounded agent-based models that involve some representation of political culture. And finally, I think it would provide an improved framework for field work. I think that field work, doing comparative analysis of political cultures will always have to involve a certain amount of field work. It should not all be done from an armchair in the library. And I think that form of field work, which is very exciting, could be assisted by having formal tools that can facilitate the recording of information in the field in a way that could be used by others and also rendered easier to curate and to maintain in proper archives for longevity and so forth. So those are my thoughts. And the final, I don't know, prescription, if you will, but the final closing thought here is that I think that the research methodology, the scientific research methodology outlined by the late philosopher of science Imre Lakatos on the development of scientific research programs, and progressive problem shifts, I think that could provide a viable way to go about and to design the first steps along that road, because it progresses from a simple start that can then gain in gradual complexity after a number of checks and corrections and adjustments and adaptations and so forth, onto producing eventually a valuable instrument. So those are my thoughts, and I thank you for your patience in listening to these ramblings, but they're meant to be productive. And who knows, perhaps those who dwell in this field may give some consideration to some of these ideas and offer support as well. So thank you.